A good manager knows that it's important to manage not only relationships with their subordinates, but also those with their bosses. Successful management of one's boss is not always easy or intuitive. In this episode, we'll discuss some of the common problems in dealing with one's boss and suggest ways for dealing with them. Hi, I'm Rick Kendall.
And I'm Fred Ball.
Welcome to Management Mastery. The purpose of these podcasts is to share what each of us has learned about good and bad management in our combined over 40 years of experience, both as managers and executive coaches. During that time, we've coached managers at every level in companies from Fortune 100s to brand new startups in all major businesses, including nonprofits, government, and education. So whether you're just starting in your first management position or are an experienced manager looking to strengthen your management skills, we know our podcast will be valuable to you.
A critical element in the success, or in some cases, failure of a manager is their ability to manage their own boss. The importance of being able to manage one's boss is covered in depth in an article by John Gabbaro and John Cotter in the January 2005 issue of the Harvard Business Review. The insights they lay out in that article are just as true today as they were 20 years ago.
Yeah, unfortunately, this essential aspect of management is sometimes ignored by otherwise effective managers. Some managers fail to understand just how dependent their bosses are on them. The boss needs a manager's help to do their own jobs effectively. The boss depends on the manager to keep them up to speed on what's going on in the department, progress on important projects, and any problems that might be arising.
At the same time, the boss can play an important role in how successful a manager is. For example, they can connect the manager with the rest of the company and provide information about the broader business environment and how it impacts the manager's work and likelihood of success. The boss can also make sure that the manager's priorities are in line with the broader needs of the business and external conditions, as well as ensure that the manager has the resources they need to succeed. In short, the manager and their boss are mutually dependent on each other for success.
Yeah, this means that managing your boss requires that you gain an understanding of the boss and his or her context, as well as your own situation. And by context, we mean at a minimum, the boss's goals and pressures, as well as their strengths and weaknesses. You need to have a feeling for your boss's organizational and personal objectives and their pressures, especially those from their own boss and others in the organization.
That's a really important point that you're making. And I would add to that if, and this is something that may or may not be able to happen, but if you can get to know some things about your boss on a personal level as well as a business level, it will make the relationship even stronger. Just as important, you need to understand what the boss's preferred working style is. Do they like to get information through memos or formal meetings or phone calls? Do they seem to enjoy conflict, or do they try to minimize it? Without this information, as a manager, you're flying blind when dealing with the boss.
Yeah, and of course, the boss is only half of the relationship. You're the other half. And developing an effective working relationship requires then that you know your own needs and strengths and weaknesses and personal style, as well as that of your boss.
Although the boss-manager relationship is one of mutual dependence, it is also one in which the manager is typically more dependent on the boss. This dependence can result in the managers feeling frustrated, even angry when their actions or options are constrained by the boss's decisions. In any case, it is always important that the manager keep in mind that bosses have their own pressures and concerns that are sometimes at odds with the wishes of the manager, often for good reason.
Yeah, and above all else, a good working relationship with the boss accommodates any such differences in work style. And as we just said, some bosses like to get information in report form so they can read and study it. Others prefer to have information presented in person so they can ask questions and discuss it. So you want to present important information to your boss in their preferred style. But when that might not be possible, you need to explain why you've presented the information differently.
Again, that's important because the way that you work and the way that the boss works may be the same and it may be different. And you need to be able, just as Rick said, if you are presenting it in a different way, you may need to present the information differently, or you may need to explain why you present it in the way you did.
Right, right.
Bosses can also differ in how they like to approach decision making. Some like to be involved in all aspects of the decision making. In this case, you need to make every effort to touch base with them regularly. Remember, regardless of how you may feel about it, a boss who wants to be involved in the decision making will become involved one way or another. So it's a good idea to keep them involved.
Boy, I think we've all learned the truth of that the hard way. On the other hand, some bosses prefer to delegate. They don't want to be involved in the nitty-gritty of decision making. They expect you to come to them with only any major problems or important changes. So be sure you've got a clear idea of your boss's preference. The manager who passively assumes that he or she knows what the boss expects in any of these areas is in for trouble. Ultimately, the burden falls on you, the manager, to find out what your boss's expectations are.
I've been in a situation where I ran into some trouble. My boss didn't want to know what I was doing. He was not interested in my area, but he knew that I handled it and I handled it effectively. However, there were times when I didn't give him enough information. For example, on something that was coming up, and then he would come back to me and say, "Why didn't you fill me in on this?" So I had to learn over time what it was that he expected and how he wanted to be dealt with. And then little by little, I was able to overcome the trouble that I had caused myself.
Yeah, like I said, I think we've all learned that lesson, oftentimes the hard way. I too had a boss that not only didn't care, but I don't think he really understood what I did. And just figuring out how much information to give him and how to read him and calibrate what I told him was never easy. It always kept me on my toes, and that's a real hard part about being a manager is understanding and tracking the moods and the expectations of your manager.
Furthermore, unfortunately, some bosses tend to not be explicit about expressing their expectations.
I think that's what
This
we're
can,
talking about. Yes.
yeah, this can be difficult, but effective managers find ways to get that information. Some managers, for example, will draft a detailed memo covering the key aspects of the work and then send it to the boss for approval. If possible, this is followed up with a detailed face-to-face discussion. A discussion like this, if done well, should bring up most, if not all, of the boss's expectations.
Other managers deal with the inexplicit boss by initiating informal discussions about what the boss considers important aspects of, quote, good management. Still others get useful information more indirectly through people who used to work for the boss. I had a situation where I finally had to coach my client, go to your boss's boss and just ask, what have you guys been talking about? And try to get a broader perspective on what's motivating your boss in that particular instance. You're not going behind his back per se, just sort of getting a broader perspective on what was actually said to him.
That's really an important point, that you can gather information in a number of different ways, and you need to use all the ways that you can in order to learn as much as possible about your boss and their style.
Oh, absolutely. And keep on it, because situations change, and so you want to keep knowing what's going on, particularly as we're talking about bosses who are not very expressive as to what they want and what they need. So how much information your boss feels they need about what you're doing will vary a lot, again, depending on their style. But it's not uncommon for a boss to want more information than you might naturally supply, or for you to think the boss knows more than they actually do. And again, effective managers make sure they find ways of keeping the boss informed in ways that fit the boss's style.
Managing the flow of information upward is particularly difficult if the boss does not like to hear about problems. Nevertheless, for the good of the organization, the boss needs to hear about failures as well as successes. Some managers deal with good news only, the bosses, by finding indirect ways to get the necessary information to them. Others see to it that the potential problems, whether in the form of good surprises or bad news, are communicated immediately. And as you learn about your boss, you'll learn more and more about the best ways for you to get them the truth.
Right. And in that vein, few things are more disabling to a boss than someone who can't be depended on or whose work can't be trusted. Very few managers are intentionally undependable, but this can inadvertently happen because of an oversight or uncertainty about the boss's priorities. And because it's so important to always be perceived as dependable, you really need to go out of your way to ensure that your boss never has a reason to question your dependability.
So in summary, no doubt some managers will resent that on top of all their other duties, they need to take time and energy to manage their relationships with their bosses as well. These managers fail to understand the importance of this activity and how it can simplify their jobs by eliminating potential problems. Effective managers recognize that this part of their work is legitimate because they realize that they're ultimately responsible for what they achieve in an organization. They know they need to establish and manage relationships with everyone they depend on, and this includes the boss.
We hope you have found this podcast useful and will come back again for more management mastery. If you have any comments about this or any of our episodes, or would like to find out more about our other services, including one-on-one coaching and group seminars for managers, visit our website at careercoachclass.com. Thanks for listening.